So we're going to cover a super cool topic. We're going to get a little bit into data visualization. Of course, we'll cover that in more detail tomorrow. But I know we've had a lot of folks who've learned the tool we're going to talk about now, and we're just delighted. It's really cool, does a lot of really neat things. And the good thing is it can kind of give you a little shortcut. So there's less code to have to worry about, but it does give you a little bit of a starting point. So let's get into intro to data visualization. All right. So data visualization with Esquisse. So good thing is that it's pretty straightforward what we're going to talk about, like not a lot of functions to remember, but we do have to install and load the Esquisse package if we haven't already. So I'll go ahead and load it up. You may have to install it, or we'll probably need to install it. Clear this out and add Esquisse. All right, so what is this package that we just installed or loaded? Hopefully actually helpful. But the Esquisse package is going to be helpful for getting us used to creating plots in R. It's actually an interactive tool to help you in RStudio. It is based on an app infrastructure called Shiny. If you are familiar with that or interested in that, don't talk a lot about it in this course, but always happy to discuss if folks are interested. And it's really cool. I think Bob Ross would approve. All right, so let's first get some data. We would need some data to do some data visualization. I think that might be a prerequisite. So let's actually load up this ER visits data set. Again, we've been using this kind of throughout the course, but it's the number of and rates of visits for heat-related illnesses in Colorado for different counties. So let's go ahead and read that in. All right, taking a look at the data. I've got counties. I've got, the rate per county, number of visits, and year. All right, so how do we start this tool called Esquisse? We can use a function called Esquisse R to start creating a plot. And that's really it. So let's give that a try. And we'll take the ER object and run that code. All right, so I have a nice little app here. All right. So you may find, if you're like me, you find the app a little clunky in RStudio. You can actually launch it in your browser. So if you add an option, viewer equals browser, it will open up in your, Chrome or Firefox or whatever you're using. All right. So now I have my app over here. All right. So you can select variables that you want to plot by dragging and dropping those variables to the axis that you want them plotted on. So, let's say I want to kind of take a look at the number of visits and make a histogram of that. I could do that. So got a lot of zeros in the data. Have to look into that a little bit more. But kind of like long trailing end between, 10 and 50 visits per year. All right. So one other cool thing that I can do here just immediately after creating any plots is go down to the code tab, and I can actually see the code that was responsible for generating this plot. So let's say I wanted to move the number of visits actually to the y-axis and and have it due by year across the x-axis. Do a little something like this. And don't worry too much about the warning. Usually that pops up because you have missing data that it has dropped from the data set. You can't really plot missing data in most cases. So, all right, I've made this nice plot here, but I'm like, okay, well, how could I recreate that in R if I'm not running the app? Ta-da, I have code right here that I can copy and I can stick in my code. All right, you can change the type of plot if you want. It's usually pretty good at guessing what kind of plot you would like, but you may want to change this. So if I'll go over to my other tab here. If we wanted to try like a line plot, I'm not sure this makes a whole lot of sense. Carrie, I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but could also try let's see. Yeah, I think that's probably for the most part what we would want to do. We could jitter the lines a little bit, but I don't think that's really what we want. So I'm okay with the point plot in this case. All right. You can create facets. So if you have another variable that you would like to kind of divide up the plot by, you can do that. So, let's say I'm looking actually at rate and I've got something like this comparing the rate of visitation to the number of visits. And I wanted to group it by year or facet it by year so I can have a different pane of my data for each year. And that would allow me, I know this is kind of small, but it would allow me to kind of at a glance, see if there's any different trends among these different years. Size can sometimes be helpful. So I might drag the year into the size category. So as the dates get more and more recent, the dots get a little bit larger. I could do year as color for, more recent years are a little darker in color. And you can have multiple variables be multiple things. That's totally fine as well. All right. If you are curious about changing the color scheme or the theme overall of the plot, you can do that with the Geometries tab and the Theme tab. So if I'm in here and thinking, all right, well, I want to change kind of the overall theme of the plot, I could do that. I'm a big fan of classic. Looks a little nice here. Can make the fonts a little larger if they're kind of tiny. And geometry. So if I want a different color palette, I could select from some of those here. They have a lot of nice ones to choose from. The Viridis palette is color vision deficiency friendly, so that is always a good option. Change the shapes as well, change the size of the points a little bit. That's a little easier to see. You can change titles with the labels and titles tab. So that is down here. Say this is ER visits. You can also look at the data while you're in Esquisse. I know that sometimes can be helpful to just kind of inspect and see, what's going on. Maybe I want to kind of look at these large values or something like that. So I can click on this button over here with the eye to scroll around in the data. Yeah. So what was this really large rate? I might be interested in that. All right. So we are basically running an app through R right now, but we actually have to tell it to stop when we're done so that we can go back to doing our regular coding. And so we have to do what's called interrupting the app. So turn Esquisse off to go back to R. And so we'll want to hit that stop button inside of R. So let's do that. You can see some nice messages that I got from the app. But if I want to turn the Esquisse app off, I just need to hit this stop button to get you'll notice my cursor, my caret here is missing. So I hit stop, I get my cursor back and I can start looking at code again. Okay, so that is Esquisse. And I do think that this is a great opportunity to talk about wide versus long data. And I know we were just discussing that, but why wide data and long data, might work differently when we're coming to data visualization. So long data is generally going to be a little bit more useful. So let's turn this off. You'll notice it's kind of grayed out because we quit Esquisse over in RStudio. So let's just go ahead and close that. All right. So let's look at why we might want to use long data in Esquisse. So let's go ahead and load. We've already got the ER data, and let's filter just to select a couple of counties and a couple of columns here. So go ahead and copy that code. And that is the same data. Just wasn't sure there. Okay, so looking at that long data set we've got, it's going to look a little something like this. We've got different counties, pretty small data set, right? Just a couple of counties, years 2012 through 2022, and just like the number of visits here, right? So long format data set. In contrast, let's take a look at a wide ER data set. And so this is something I could have just, formatted, with pivot longer, pivot wider, pretty much similar data. Okay, so this is the rate, not the visits, but pretty similar data set. Notice that columns are different years compared to this one, right? The year is just one column. Again, this is kind of what they look like. And so let's think about, making a plot of visit rates by year for different counties. When we're thinking about the wide ER data, we could even launch the Esquisse app. Let's go ahead and launch ER wide ER. Let me do the right object. All right. So I've got county and I've got all these columns, right? But I can only do 1 year at a time. And I only have one observation per year, right? I can only do one of those years at a time. So it's going to make it a little harder to kind of compare years side by side or color the values or the outcomes by year. So let's get rid of that. Make sure I stop the app. And let's look at long ER. And so notice I have less to choose from here, right? But I could do county on the x-axis, comparing Boulder and Denver. And then maybe I want the visits on the y-axis, and maybe year could be Phil. Okay, so I can see kind of cumulatively what's going on in each year. So a little bit easier to put all the data in one place or one plot. Okay, we've got a gut check. So why might we want to use Esquisse? So we could A, explore our data, could B, maybe get a head start on your code using that code tab, or both of them. Yes, totally. I agree. So, even if you're not going to use Esquisse to make publication quality or like the top-notch report quality figures, it can be helpful for data exploration for sure, right? Like do a little quick gut check of your data. And then also, I love this feature, right? Like I can just copy and paste that and then take it back to R. You would never know I didn't write that code from scratch, right? I get to be super sneaky and run that same code again to generate the same visualization. Amazing. All right. There are some alternatives if you find Esquisse is like a little clunky and you're wanting to try something else. There are a ton of alternatives, and we don't really there's not one that's better than the other in all ways. So encourage you to explore them if you're interested or want to try a different one. Again, some of them are have different capabilities and things like that. And there's also a function called autoplot that also does some of this guessing of kind of what kind of plot you might want. It works really well with some packages. So if you're interested in that, so the one I've seen it with the most is like a time series data handling package that it is really good at guessing kind of what you want in your plot. You can explore that a little as well. All right. So use the Esquisse R function on a data set. It's the only function we got to remember here, besides loading the Esquisse package, of course. And you can use the viewer equals browser to launch it in your browser. I find personally that's a little easier for me to work with rather than RStudio, especially because then you can copy and paste code into your R Markdown, which is nice. Code can be copied, as I just mentioned, and can be generated in the plots pane here or underneath your chunk, depending on what your settings are. And it's going to be easier to make visualizations if your code is in long form. So get comfortable with that pivot longer if your data is super duper spread out. We may be wanting to use that a little bit to prepare our data. All right. And that is the quick intro to data visualization. And I want to make sure, because playing with Esquisse is super fun, I want to make sure we end on a high note here. Yeah, work smarter, not harder. Exactly. And so we've been working with a lot of different data sets already throughout the course, and maybe even some of your own. And so I want us to kind of try to bring some of that into Esquisse and see how it goes. All right. Any questions about the tool or anything like that before we give it a shot? I know we're all really excited to get to playing with the data. So I will go ahead and open up those breakout rooms and we'll get a little practice. Oh, remind us when we should stop Esquisse. Yeah. So whenever you're done kind of making your plots and you need to go back to doing code, that's when you should stop the app. Just remember that when you stop it, you'll have to start it up from scratch again. So kind of get the code, get the plot in a state that you like. And then what I would do is copy the code, put it somewhere in your R Markdown, and then you can shut down the app. All right. There's a couple things you may need to load to get started. So make sure you've installed Esquisse and that you've loaded it up. So give us a moment to do that. All right. So we're going to take a little shortcut and prepare some of the data already. And let me clear out my environment, clear this out. So we're going to work with that CalEnviro screen data set again and go ahead and run this chunk. You should get a CalEnviro screen subset. So we're just looking at the CES score. So if we're like looking at basically all of those environmental attributes, this score is going to be a little bit higher if folks are exposed to, more environmental concerns and pollutants and things like that. And that's pretty closely tied to like the percentile. So what percentile is that score in? If you're in the first percentile, you're pretty low risk. But if you're in the top percentile, you're pretty high risk. So we've got that percentile score, an asthma rate, and it's like a adjusted rate of the ER visits. And then this children purse less than less 10 is estimating the percent of children under 10. Okay. And then this low, middle, high is based on that score. Okay. So we've prepared some data. We're maybe ready to do some plotting. Okay. So let's do Esquisse R and start our investigation of CES sub. And again, I'm going to do viewer equals browser because I think that looks a little nicer. And it launched way over here. Sorry about that. All right. And then this way I can kind of refer back to the instructions. It's not, the app is not blocking it. All right. So drag and drop the children percent less than 10 to be plotted on the x-axis. Okay. So let's drag that to X. And by default, it's going to give me a histogram. So that makes sense, right? We'd expect kind of a random normal distribution of children less than 10. I think that looks pretty nice. You rarely see a bell curve that nice. All right. We want to drag and drop asthma variable to be plotted on the y-axis. All right. So just a quick glance, maybe possible that there's some kind of relationship here, but basically a big blob. So again, this was the children under 10 or percent children under 10, and then the ER asthma visits. All right. And then what happens when you drag CES percent category to the facet region of the Esquisse GUI? This is that category, right? So let's drag that over here. All right. We've got high, middle, and low. I think that's cut off a little. Not sure why it's so wide here. But yeah, remember these corresponded with the risk score. This one's NA, right? Couldn't assign a risk score. So, maybe we could ignore that for now. But the low, we do see kind of a spread of children here, but there's not quite the spread of asthma visits. Those are typically, those ER visits are a little higher in the riskier areas. So the middle and high risk area. What happens if you move this to color? Let's try that. Yeah, interesting. So it seems like, the low risk category down here, the middle risk, and then the high risk. And let's copy and paste the code into the chunk below. So let's first do the facet one, copy that code so we could make the plot again if we wanted to. Okay, so I've code to make 2 separate plots. Pretty cool. All right, questions about the plots I just generated here? Anyone having any issues getting Esquisse to work? Sometimes the setup is the trickiest part here. Yeah, it shouldn't. So it's running locally. It's just using your browser to run the app. So it shouldn't need the internet because it's just like your local address here. But, it doesn't mean that it's not clunky and might not freeze. So hopefully we can get it working. And sometimes it might help to stop it here, close out the window, and just like restart it or restart our studio. All right, this one's pretty quick. We'll just kind of see what that looks like. And then, try to diagnose any issues we might be having running Esquisse. Let's change the type of plot. We'll copy and paste it in here. So let's see, do a smooth. Those relationships are kind of questionable, maybe. Do a line, or if this one will look any good. Yeah, it's like, I don't know. No text in this one. So, all right, let's do, I'm not sure that one really makes sense either. Let's just do a line plot. All right, and we'll copy that code and pop it into the chunk here. Okay. So I'm going to close the app and we'll have to hit stop as well just to get my pointer back. And just to prove to ourselves that we can recreate these, I want to run not this line again because that's going to launch the app again. So just be careful if you're running the whole thing, creating that plot again and creating this plot maybe. And then finally, maybe this plot. And so now that we have some actual code down, that's where we can start to kind of play around a little. And we'll see more tomorrow how to customize the code for our plots. But ggplot, which is the tool or package we're using to create these visualizations, is extremely extensive. You can add on things via additional packages as well. But it can do so much, and so much so that I don't think anyone has all the possibilities memorized. So definitely digging in the documentation or Googling when you want something specific. Definitely something that even the pros do a lot. Okay. Any issues getting Esquisse up and running? Always happy to screen share if we're stuck. I want us to be able to kind of play around with the tool a little bit if we can.